You are listening to ProveText, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture with Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb and Dr. Frederick J. Long. Welcome and enjoy.
Thank you for accepting my paper. I'll be looking at purpose or intentionality constructions in light of cognitive grammar with a view to consider the interpretive payoff of distinguishing among various types of these constructions. An author's choice of construction as opposed to another is a matter of construal for contextual meaning. Now, purpose constructions are to be distinguished from causal ones on the basis that they express intentionality, whereas causal ones do not. That is, an implied or actual agent aims at, strives for, and or moves with intention such that some goal or end would be achieved. Often a means is specified. An author's compositional choice to use a purpose construction profiles some event act for intentionality. Thus identify purpose constructions primarily on the basis of those conveying the semantic relationship of means to ends, and then secondarily by the variety of grammatical constructions. Within inductive Bible study, we call this instrumentation. So let's consider a couple examples here from there we go, from Matthew 5:16 and 17. So let your light so shine before people in such a way that they see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We see that the opos is used there with the subjunctive to indicate purpose, a purpose clause. And then in the next verse, 5:17, don't consider that I came to abolish the law and the prophets. I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill them. There you have coming to do something. That's a means to end with a verb of motion. So we have means to end. All right. Within Greek grammars, one finds a broad acknowledgement that a variety of types of purpose clauses exist, but very rarely constructions are described, that is, simply with the prepositional phrase. For example, Herbert Smythe, in his Grammar of Classical Greek, offered the following common methods of expressing purpose. And there you can see them. Ina, relative pronoun with future indicative, future participle, os, infinitive, articular infinitive, preposition, sometimes even osta with the infinitive, if it's working with the right kind of verb of effecting its implied purpose. Other grammarians also describe purpose clauses. Got Daniel Wallace. These are kind of scattered throughout. You have Heinrich von Siebenthal, and this was a very helpful. He consolidates these together, and then at the bottom, he kind of in little print, he says there's also relative clauses that can indicate purpose, and then there's a final use of ke or kai. So my question is, what distinguishes among these different options? Dana and Manti really say, we need to pay attention to the options and we need to master them, but they provide absolutely no guidance as to what distinguishes one from the other. So they list 6 different kinds of constructions. Within cognitive grammar, I think we get a little bit of help. Ronald Langacker, in his program of cognitive grammar, describes profiling by word choice, semantic marking. You choose words that kind of profile certain things. You have specificity level, detailed granularity, or general schematicity. You've got scale and scope of predication, and then a relative salience of elements that are explicitly mentioned and described. And so among the fundamental tenets of Langacker's cognitive grammar are that grammar is conceptualization, and that is, it's perspectival and imagistic, and that grammar and lexicon consist of assemblies of symbolic structures built successively from simpler to more complex constructions. Specifically, within cognitive grammar, purpose clauses are projected elaborations of imagined space. According to Rodin and Dervin, they represent abstract epistemic space of some event. And if we look at these examples once again, that kind of abstract space is, in order that they would see your good deeds, And then with Jesus, he came to fulfill. That's a kind of projected, imagined space that, of course, as we look at the rest of the teaching on the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus' life, we see that fulfillment. So Gunther Rodin and Renee Dervin, if you want to get a good overview of cognitive grammar, they describe English grammar from this perspective, so it's very helpful. And here they say purposes are situations that are often metaphorically conceptualized as destinations. Destinations and purposes are linked in our experience. We in order to attain a purpose, we often have to go to a certain place. Purpose constructions are adjunctive. They are normally peripheral participants in the setting, and but are more closely integrated into the core than spatial, temporal, and circumstantial settings. In prepositional phrases, the orientational preposition for suggests frontness as well as benefaction gained from reaching a purpose. So my research questions are as follows. What types of purpose constructions exist in the GNT and why? Why the variety? What motivates the use of one construction over another? I think it's a matter of construal. What construction is default? What is the relative salience or prominence that attends one construction over another? And how does grammatical marking contribute to the construal of each construction type? And what are the ways to increase the relative salience of the constructions? And I'll start with just a low-hanging fruit here, levels of negation. Smythe lists these different ways that you can have negative clauses, ina me, opos me, os me, and me alone. I would suggest that me is the least marked and has less prominence. And so if an author wanted to not stress the negative implied purpose, you'd use me. Os me doesn't occur in the GNT. Then you have ina me and opos me. I think opos me is more marked than ina me. Ina me, I think, is the default. We could also switch out different negative adverbs. Me pote, BDEG says, is frequently used as an emphatic form of me. So BDEG recognizes there's something going on with that additional semantic marking. Mekati construes still yet in the negation, a continuation marking, and we'll look at that briefly at the end. So in my listing of intentionality constructions, it kept growing. I used to show students 7, and then as I considered the proposal, it was 10, and then as I read von Siebenthal and others, I was like, well, I added a couple more. So 10 and 11 are added. I also changed 4 a little bit to talk about agentive action of motion and sending. So this is in the abstract. I'm not going to go through all these. I've filled it out with some examples of each. So is opos and ina the same or not? We could debate regarding my list whether we should consolidate and treat equivalent ina and opos, as is commonly done, but these are not equivalent constructions because, as lexicons note, opos is grammatically marked for manner in such a way that. So look at LSJ and compare BDAG. And in our example here, the additional semantic marking of manner is indicated by the utos at the front. And so you have what I would call a correlative emphasis of 2 connectors or adverbs working together to ramp up the prominence in such a way that. Now, the only translation that I found that translates it that way is the NASB. The others simply use that or so that. I think that's insufficient. So I don't think they are the same. Regarding the list also, we could offer more variety and specification. For example, grammarians observe that purpose constructions with ina and opos can sometimes occur with the particle on. I'm sorry, I went too fast. So on can occur, but what does this mean? So it's not enough just to note it, but what's the difference? Well, G.B. Weiner in his 18th century grammar, which was the basis for Bloss and De Bruyne and Funk, he says that when you have this, it indicates a purpose, the possibility of attaining which is still doubtful, or the attainment of which is viewed as depending on circumstance. So the addition of the on particle is a matter of construal from the author's perspective. And finally, we could consider adding more constructions. In Heinrich von Siebenthal, it's a helpful grammar, really helpful. He identifies a final or purpose indicating kai. Now, I don't like the additional, all these different uses as if somehow kai means purpose. Ka does not mean purpose. And so here's the example that he provides. Really, I think this is a ramped up coming purpose construction. So rather than coming to do something with an infinitive, if an author wants to construe it with more prominence, you can use the ke with a future indicative to make it more prominent. So it's a matter of construal. Another construction identified by Dana and Manti and von Siebenthal is the relative clause with additional purpose force. Again, I don't like saying relative clauses can be purpose clauses, but if you look at each of these instances, what you have is a verb of sending, and then you basically are nominalizing and making more prominent the agent of the purpose outcome. And in each of these contexts, it's clear that that is indeed what's happening. John the Baptist fulfills Scripture. Manasseh of Cyprus is additionally specified as a disciple of long standing, so he's very prominent, and this is a way to continue increasing his prominence by this relative construction. And Timothy is the beloved and faithful child in the Lord, and he's going to arrive in Corinth so that Paul doesn't have to come with a rod. So it's very prominent. Listen to Timothy so I don't have to beat you, essentially. So we have a variety of these purpose constructions, and how can we differentiate them? Well, in their accounting of cognitive linguistics, William Croft and D. Allen Cruz argue that grammatical inflections and grammatical constructions play a major role in construing the experience to be communicated in specific ways. Indeed, they further maintain that the role of conceptualization in language is clearest when a single language provides alternative expressions for what appears to be true functionally equivalent situations. So in my attempt to understand how different purpose constructions construe events, I've identified and related the assemblage of structures as follows. I'm concerned about the relative salience of each construction. So let's pull back. We have a basic infinitive with verb of sending. We can add an article, genitive, to with that. We also have prepositional phrases with proros or is, maybe some others that can indicate purpose. So each of these has a kind of semantic markedness or lack of markedness. The infinitive is very basic. You add a genitive article, then you have a semantic marking with the preposition. Interestingly, you can combine the infinitive with the preposition to have a more complex construction, and it's kind of rare in the New Testament. I think that the prosto, isto construction is a bit more prominent when you see it. We could also talk about future participles, some mood dynamism. These are post-nuclear in location, rare, 10 occurrences. Sometimes the present participle seems to have the same kind of function. We talk about ina with the subjunctive, which increases the mood dynamicity from infinitive participle to subjunctive. Then we also have more marked kinds of constructions with mekri, opos, and others. And then I think we sometimes have imperatives with instrumental participle. So I think there's a modal prominence increase from infinitive to participle, subjunctive. We could add future indicatives. If you want to make it even more vivid, you can change the subjunctive to future, and then eventually to an imperative or hortatory kind of form. So let's consider, and well, I don't have much time, but how much time do I have? We started a little bit late.
10 minutes, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Hey, good. You can drill me with all kinds of questions, so that'd be good. Okay, so let me walk through an example, Ephesians 4:10 through 16. This passage is noteworthy because it showcases numerous phrasal and clausal purpose constructions. The first occurs in 4:10 with ina, which I consider again default, and I think von Siebenthal as well, because when he talks about alternative constructions, he uses ina. We observe quantitative emphasis with repeated instances of the adjective all. Paul here affirms that Christ's incarnation and ascension and typological fulfillment of Yahweh's triumphal regathering of the exiled captives of Psalm 68 is the means to the end of Christ fulfilling all things, by which I think of worldwide mission to the nations, which is building on his previous argument. So pretty significant purpose statement here, means to end. As the argument continues, Christ gives leaders, that is, gifted apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, as the means for certain purposes, denoted with three prepositional phrases: pros, followed by two instances of eis. These three phrases work together probably as a progressive list of activities, and each with objective genitives. It's like a case study of objective genitives. But what distinguishes pros from eis? Pros is marked nearness, plus nearness, coming right up to the edge of an entity. So the word was pros ton theon, with God. They're differentiated but close together. And so two entities differentiated but touching. This informs the goal of mending or equipping the saints. Katartismos is a medical term metaphorically applied to preparation in discipleship. The preposition eis is marked for entrance from outside to inside an entity or reality, to get into it. Here, for the work or working of service, is a goal entered into by prepared saints. The last prepositional phrase also is marked for entering into building up Christ's body, which could be understood qualitatively, like virtue formation, or quantitatively in terms of numbers of members. So there you have means to ends. The next instance of a purpose construction involves mekri with the subjunctive. Mekri marks extension in time and space, bidag. It is a very unusual way to construe purpose, indicating extension towards a temporally or spatially construed goal. Here, an assurance, faith, and knowledge space centered in Jesus' identity is stressed. He is Son of God. He is the complete or mature man. He is the measure of maturity as the Christ. This goal is attained by a layering of previous intentional notions. Christ's ascending to fulfill all things, and his sending of gifted leaders to prepare the saints to do service to build up the church. And so there we have it. And lastly then, or not lastly, but we have a couple other constructions. We have a negative one, ina meketi. Meketi is formed with the adverb eti marked plus continuance. Here, contextually, this negative goal builds from the previous positive goal by showing that the previous positive goal of attaining Christ, or knowledge and faithfulness of Christ, is itself the means to avoid being infantile with all that attends this immature state, being tricked, deceived, carried about by human false teaching, etc. This marking of plus continuance in meketi suggests this infantile state is default and would continue unless we attain to the goal of the maturity of Christ. It means to end. And the final purpose construction in 4:15 involves a fronted circumstantial participle functioning to provide an important framework that is a contextually implied adverbial, has an implied sense of means. But by truthing in love, let us grow up into him in every respect. Contextually, truth has been clearly associated with the gospel as the word of truth and represents the countering antidote to the villainy and deception of the previous verse. Being truthful in love is the means to the end or goal of growing up into Christ. Well, I hope I have shown how the various purpose constructions, kind of walked around some examples, construe different things. I would say choice of construction construes contextual meaning. Thank you.
Perhaps you're interested in taking your language instruction to the next level. Perhaps you're interested in what second language acquisition has to say about the way people learn languages. A Handbook of SLA for Biblical Studies by Jennifer E. Noonan is the place to start. It introduces 12 important principles drawn from the field of SLA research and practice. These 12 principles include topics such as types of language knowledge, types of language instruction, input, output, language skills, and the role of the learner. Learn how to integrate SLA principles into the biblical and ancient language classrooms. Visit glosahouse.com to get your copy today. Glosa House, language resources for the global community.